Hi, everyone. This is the week 11 lecture for those of you who are not able to attend the lecture in week 11, especially on the Monday holiday. And as usual, let's start with a review of what you learned last week. In this case, you'll do it just on your own. So you can either go to kahoot.it and enter the PIN number on this slide, or you can just scan the QR code and it'll take you to the Kahoot. There's about 6 questions to ask. It should be fairly quick. But yeah, just a quick review on some of the lecture and seminar material from week 10. Okay, so pause this video, do the Kahoot, and then come back after you finish that, okay? Right, so this week 11 lecture is going to focus on assessment 3. And I've recorded an example oral presentation. Now, it's obviously not a full real example because I did it at the computer, and you're going to have to do it live in the classroom, standing up in front of your fellow classmates, okay? But in any case, I hope it'll give you some idea about how to give a good oral presentation. To be honest with you, I think I spoke a little too quickly, and as a result, it's a little short. But I think if I went at a moderate speed, then I would easily reach 5 minutes. So keep that in mind. But anyways, as you're watching, try to answer these 3 questions, okay? What are the 3 main sections of the presentation? What are the main points of the 3 sections, and how does the speaker conclude the presentation? So as you're watching the presentation, you might have a piece of paper and jot down what the answers to these 3 questions, okay? As you can see, I've uploaded the example presentation onto YouTube, so you can either go to this link or you can just scan the QR code and you should be able to see it. It's also on the link to extra materials, right? If you go to that on Blackboard and look under week 11, then you can find this this video as well, the example oral presentation, and you can find the PPT. Okay, so pause the video again, watch the presentation, which is around 5 minutes, and then come back and we'll continue and we'll talk about how to do well on assessment 3. Yeah, okay. Right, so hopefully had a chance to watch that and get an idea of what a self-reflection oral presentation might be like from a critical standpoint. So in answer to the first question, what are the 3 main sections? And this is, of course, also from the assignment guidelines, right? So make sure you read those before you prepare your presentation and after you prepare your presentation, just to double check. Okay, so the 3 main sections, there's critical thinking strategies. I presented 2 of those, right? Critical thinking stages, both at the beginning of the course and now, and then I related a personal experience. Okay, those are the 3 main sections. And in terms of the main points of the 3 sections, the 2 strategies that I talked about, intellectual humility, which is from the course book. Remember, you need to do 1 of the strategies from the course book. And then the second strategy was a key critical thinking question. What assumptions am I making? And then for the second section, I talked about the 2 stages. At the beginning of the course, I felt I was a practicing thinker. And by the end of the course, I felt I had advanced to an accomplished thinker. And I related this in part due to my reading of the course book and the interesting and different insights it gave me about critical thinking. Okay, and then in terms of my personal experience, I related a story about how I moved from Macau to Hong Kong with my wife and how we made some assumptions that turned out to be not very accurate, even though it was quite an important decision. Okay. And finally, concluding the presentation, I talked about the value of critical thinking in the course, and I pointed to future growth in my critical thinking. And I did revisit this idea about intellectual humility, especially in terms of being a teacher of a course, but yet still being able to learn about critical thinking by listening to different perspectives, reading different perspectives. Okay, so that's the content, the answers to the 3 questions. So now, thinking about the critical thinking strategies, okay, that you might present, where might you get these strategies from? And that you'll highlight in your presentation. And remember, you should do 2, possibly 3, though 3 might be too many. Depends on the length of your presentation. You really need to keep it around 5 minutes, okay? Not much more than 5 minutes. I think the teacher will cut you off after 5 minutes, 15 seconds. So it's really quite strict. So 2 strategies is probably enough. But in any case, a key critical thinking question might be one of the strategies. And I highlighted this in my presentation. It could be a point from one of the lectures or seminars that was raised. For example, last week I talked about healthy skepticism. So maybe that was quite interesting for you and made an impact on your thinking. One of the logical fallacies, for example, that you think is quite useful. But also remember, you have to do at least one strategy from the course book. It could be from chapter 3, like I did. And I asked you to do that reading for chapter 3 earlier in the course. But do have a look at chapters 8, 9, and 10, or other parts of the course book. But I think there's some quite valuable ideas, and you'd be surprised. Don't think that you'll get everything you need to know about critical thinking just from the course, right? And that's the value of the course book. That's the value of doing extra reading for a course, right? You can learn on your own independently and not just depend on the ideas and approach of your teacher. Okay, so those are some places where you might get these critical thinking strategies, right? And they should come from the course, yeah, just to highlight that you've learned something. Right, and in terms of evaluating your critical thinking stage, you should revisit chapter 5 of the course book that talks about the different stages of critical thinking and answer these 2 questions, right? What stage were you at the beginning of the semester? Now, you might recall that at the beginning of the semester, I asked you to go to chapter 5 and look at the different stages and kind of determine where you felt you were at and why at the beginning of the semester. Hopefully you did that. If you didn't, then you got to kind of use your memory, which is not quite as reliable, right? But in any case, the second question, what stage of critical thinking are you at now? Okay, so again, look at chapter 5, look at the different stages. Have you advanced in your critical thinking? Hopefully, but okay. But how much? It's kind of up to you to look at the different stages, look at the explanations for the different stages, and kind of justify where you think you're at in terms of those explanations. Okay, and explain briefly why you feel you're at this stage now. And then finally, what kind of personal experiences might you use in your presentation to show your change in thinking? Well, it could be an action that you did or took in the past. Could be an interaction you had with somebody in the past. Could be a decision you made in the past, or it could be a belief or opinion that you held in the past. And in all these cases, you would describe your experience in the past with it, and then talk about how you would do things differently or how you would think differently, and why. Okay, it could be a link to a critical thinking strategy in some case that you presented earlier. That might be a nice connection. Yeah, you might notice in my presentation, I linked one of the strategies, making assumptions, to my personal experience where we made an assumption about the move from Macau to Hong Kong. Okay, so that was kind of a nice link, I felt. So those are the 3 parts, okay? And if you want, as you're preparing for your oral presentation, have a think about these different parts and the different choices you have and what things connect well, can make for a better presentation. But yeah, you have quite a variety of choice, yeah? And it's all about you. It's your self-reflection, okay? And, in terms of the learning that you did in the course. And remember that reflection is a key aspect of critical thinking. So we're hoping to give you some practice with that through this presentation. So after the presentation, there is a Q&A, okay? And what are some example questions that could be asked after my self-reflection oral presentation? Well, here are three possible questions. Yeah. So one question might be, why do you and others tend to make assumptions without thinking? So, yeah, and how was this semester of teaching this course different from previous semesters? Other than intellectual humility, what is another valuable learning point from the course book? Okay, and you notice there are three questions. And in fact, your teacher and or your classmates are not allowed to ask more than three questions, okay? Which means that if you answer these questions very quickly, and there are 4 minutes, then there's going to be a problem, okay? So you need to try to answer these questions at a little more length to fill up kind of the 4 minutes. Yeah. So let me give you an example. First question, right? Why do you and others tend to make assumptions without thinking? Well, here's an example of an answer. Right, yes, assumptions, why do we make assumptions? Well, one reason, basic reason why we make assumptions is that we make lots of assumptions in our life. It's kind of a habit. And a lot of these assumptions are natural and they make perfect sense, right? And you make an assumption that a class will follow the regular schedule and there won't be a cancellation unless you get some kind of announcement, right? So we make assumptions all through the day, and therefore it becomes a habit. And this means that whenever we kind of make decisions, we tend to follow our habits, right? And that means that, unfortunately, even for important decisions, we might follow that habit of making an assumption without thinking more deeply or clearly. So I think that's probably the main reason why a lot of us make assumptions without thinking more deeply. A second reason probably has to do with this idea that we are fairly confident in terms of what we believe or what we think, and it's not natural to kind of question that confidence, right? Unless someone helps us by questioning it for us, that's always useful. But yeah, it's not a natural thing to sort of stop and question what you think is true, because we tend to be fairly confident about that. So I think that's part of critical thinking, isn't it? That we do realize, okay, this is important. I need to stop. I need to examine my assumptions. I need to investigate further. So those are the two main reasons, I think. Okay, so you can see that I answered that question with quite a bit of depth. I gave two reasons and I explained each reason. Okay, gave some examples. So that's a decent answer, right? And you can see I took up a fair amount of time in answering that question. Second question, how is this semester of teaching this course different from previous semesters? Right, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I've taught this course now 4 times, okay? So 4 semesters in a row, in fact. And each time it's a little different, but this semester in particular was different because of the classrooms. In previous semesters, I taught in quite large lecture-style classrooms. And so the feeling in terms of interacting with students was very different. This semester, we sat in classrooms where students were sitting much closer to me and sitting closer to each other in a way. And so there was a little more interaction I felt, and opportunities to talk to students, to sit with students in some cases and observe them or discuss with them. So that was quite different. That was interesting. And I think I enjoyed it more than having this distance from students in a large lecture hall. I don't tend to lecture much, as you notice. I like to have interactive activities with discussions and things like that. So I think another aspect of teaching this course that's a little different is that Linda and I kind of focused a little more on helping students prepare for the assessments. I mean, this lecture in week 11 is a case in point where I've decided to focus exclusively on preparing for assessment 3, whereas in the past I fit in some further sort of instruction and activities connected with skepticism and things like that. So I think that's an important difference, and we're hoping that the extra input and practice that we give students for the assessments will help them to do better and help you do better in the assessments this semester. So those are a couple of the differences between this semester and previous semesters teaching the course. Okay, so again, you see an example of answering a question. Notice that in each case, I'm trying to give more than one reason or more than one example, that kind of thing, right? It's a good habit or principle to, when someone asks you a question, try to think of at least two possible answers or reasons or things like that, if you can. If you focus on only one, which is possible, but you'll tend to answer the question more in depth and with a little more content and longer. So, and that's good, yeah. I'll skip the third question for now. You got the idea. And to be honest with you, I think I covered almost like somewhere between 3 and 4 minutes, which is good in my answers. Maybe there was no need for a third question. Okay. So in terms of the example Q&A, what are some questions that the teacher and or your classmates might ask you? Okay. Well, there might be a specific question about the content of your talk. Okay. There might be a question about your learning in the course. Yeah. Maybe how you evaluate some aspect of the course in terms of, some of the key critical thinking questions or logical fallacies or assessments even, how useful they were for you. There could be a question about your future use of critical thinking, whether it's in your studies or in your job or something like that, or maybe some area of improvement. And there could be a question about the course book, because again, that's part of the English reading requirement. We would like you to read more and fulfill that requirement by looking at the course book. Okay, so these are all possible general categories of questions that you might receive. And remember, you won't get more than 3 questions during the Q&A. Okay, so it's important that you answer them in depth. In terms of the questions that, example questions from my presentation, well, you can see the first question is a specific question about the presentation content, since I talked about assumptions and as one of the strategies and as my personal experience, right? So that question kind of relates to my content in the presentation. The second question is a question about the course, the learning in the course or something like that. And then the third question is about the course book. Okay, so those are some examples of questions you might, in terms of the Q&A. Now, how to answer the questions well, how to get a good mark in that section, right? It's a 4-minute Q&A section. So first, make sure you answer each question directly. Yeah, because some students, they don't, they might answer indirectly or start talking about something else that's not related. So do answer the question directly. Second, I've repeated this a number of times, try to provide more depth to the answers to your questions. Provide explanations, examples, okay, and in some cases, more than one reason, more than one example, that kind of thing. Okay. Obviously, you need to communicate your ideas clearly in terms of the language you use and the pronunciation. So make sure that especially in terms of the content of your presentation, make sure that you've checked your pronunciation. There's different tools you can get to check your pronunciation, right? So to have a look at that. Use ideas, principles, and language from the course, right? And part of the reason of any assessment is to show that you've learned something, okay, from the course. So by using ideas, principles, and language from the course, you are demonstrating that, you've actually been paying attention and you've learned something. So that's always good. Finally, in terms of how you speak, try to aim for moderate speed, not too fast, not too slow, without long pauses. If there's long pauses, it means you haven't prepared your presentation well enough, you haven't practiced it, right? So try to avoid these long pauses. Use good eye contact and body language as you're standing up in front of class, and try to speak with some enthusiasm, okay? With some expression in your voice and in your eyes and that kind of thing. The last thing I'll have to mention that is quite important is that you should not read your presentation, okay? Because you'll get a low mark if you do this. Try to avoid don't write your script ahead of time. Just use the notes, use the text from your slides, and practice speaking from that, okay? That's quite important. Don't read, okay? So here are some examples of possible questions that could be asked after your presentation. So one question might be, would you recommend this critical thinking course to other PolyU students? Why or why not? Okay, so it's a kind of an evaluation of the course, yeah? To what extent do you think it was useful? To what extent do you think it was enjoyable? That kind of thing, yeah? Another possible question, how similar or different is this critical thinking course to your liberal studies course in high school? So this is about the learning points in this course. And, if you didn't take liberal studies in Hong Kong, then you could just mention that to your teacher when they ask, and they'll give you a different question. But a lot of you have. And so, this is getting you to think about the different learning points from the two courses. Third question, did you come across any similarities between the ideas in the course book and what was presented in the course lectures? So this again is kind of asking you to think about what you read in the course book, making sure you read something in the course book, and trying to make a connection to the learning points from the course. Yeah? And finally, here's a question about the future. What is one aspect of critical thinking that you need to improve in the future? So again, reflecting on your learning in the course, what's an area that you think you need to improve on? Okay, so what I would recommend to you, if you're not having the actual seminar, these questions will be revisited in the seminar in week 11, but if you don't have a seminar, that's for students who are taking the seminar on Thursday. I would recommend that you practice answering these questions. Maybe film yourself and see how long you talk and see how well you can answer and see how, if you can develop the answer with explanations, examples, that kind of thing, so that you can hit, let's say, at least a minute, if not a minute and a half, in terms of your answer to any one of these questions. So give it a try, And practice makes perfect, right? Depending on when your presentation is, you could also book a SAP, right? A student speaking assistance program where you could practice answering these questions in front of a teacher and get feedback. Okay, so that's the assessment 3 related content. And just to remind you that in week 12, when we're week 13 in the seminar classes, you'll be giving your assessment 3 presentations and doing the Q&A. And this will be scheduled by your seminar teacher. Okay, so you'll either be assigned to week 12 or week 13, not both, right? Do try to come to the week 12 lecture. I'll be talking about the assessment 2 final draft. By then you'll have received your feedback on the assessment 2 second draft. Okay, and then we'll talk about what you need to do for the final draft and how to get a good mark on the final draft. And in week 13 in the lecture, we'll be talking, kind of reviewing some of the major learning points, getting feedback from you, and also thinking about the future of your critical thinking and how to apply it in life and that kind of thing. Yeah. So thanks very much. I hope this was useful. Good luck on your assessment 3. And as I mentioned, you'll be working on assessment 2, which is due, the Monday after week 13, so the Monday of week 14. And we'll be talking in more detail about the deadlines and stuff like that and what you need to include. Okay, thanks very much. Good luck and have a good week.